Have you ever noticed how early you began to feel older than the people around you? Not in age, but in atmosphere, as if you were breathing a different air? Even now, when someone laughs too loudly at something that feels thin, you sense a quiet fatigue settle in your chest. Conversations skim across the surface and you feel yourself drifting downward, as though depth is not something you choose, but something gravity insists upon. You sit there, listening, present but slightly apart, carrying a weight that has no visible shape. You remember being young and already aware, not aware in the dramatic sense, not gifted with mystical insight, but aware in the way a small animal in a field listens for movement in tall grass. You noticed shifts in tone before arguments began. You felt tension before it found words. While others played without thinking, you watched. You observed the space between sentences. You learned that silence can be louder than shouting. No one formally assigned you this role. It unfolded quietly. A door closed a little too hard. A sigh lingered at the dinner table. A parent distracted by worries you couldn't name but could feel. Love may have been present, but it was uneven, flickering. And in that flicker, your nervous system began to reorganize itself around a simple idea: stay alert. You did not decide to become serious. Seriousness grew around you like a shell. When comfort felt unpredictable, you learned to become predictable. When emotional expression seemed to complicate things, you refined yourself into calm. You didn't ask for reassurance because something inside you calculated the cost. You sensed that needing too much might tip the balance of a room already holding more than it could carry. As a child, you were praised for being mature. Adults smiled at your composure. They admired your thoughtfulness. They called you wise for your age. It sounded like a compliment, and in many ways it was. But praise has a subtle power. It can gently steer identity. When your steadiness was celebrated, it became safer to be steady than to be messy. Safer to understand than to be confused. Safer to hold than to be held. Psychology does not describe this as destiny. It describes adaptation. A developing brain under emotional unpredictability sharpens certain circuits. It becomes highly skilled at pattern recognition, at emotional forecasting. Attachment begins shaping itself long before language. If closeness feels inconsistent, the nervous system adjusts. It learns that self-containment is stability. It learns that regulation must come from within. So your depth did not arrive as a gift placed in your hands by fate. It formed slowly, like calluses. What others later called insight may have begun as vigilance. What they admired as calm may have started as caution. The old soul is often simply the child who learned early that the room must be scanned before it can be entered. As you moved into adolescence, the gap widened. Your peers chased noise, novelty, friction. You found yourself tired of drama that seemed unnecessary. You were drawn toward conversations about meaning, fairness, loss. You wanted to understand why people hurt each other, why promises shift, why love sometimes disappears without explanation. While others experimented with identity, you felt as though yours had already solidified into something watchful and contained. In friendships, you were the listener, the one who could sit through long confessions without flinching. You translated emotions back to people with surprising clarity. They left feeling understood. You left carrying fragments of their stories, neatly folded somewhere inside you. You rarely asked for the same in return. not because you didn't want it, but because something in you hesitated at the edge of exposure. In relationships, you offered steadiness. You were the calm during conflict, the reflective presence when emotions surged. Others leaned into that. They trusted your stability. Yet there were quiet moments when you wondered why connection felt just slightly out of reach. You could see the architecture of intimacy, but participating in it fully felt like stepping into a current without knowing how strong it might become. Neuroscience would say your nervous system learned early to regulate before it learned to relax. Strong emotion once signaled potential chaos, so your brain strengthened pathways of suppression and control. Emotional waves were filtered before they reached the surface. This looks like wisdom. It feels like composure. But internally, it can resemble constant monitoring. A guard who never quite clocks out. You notice everything. A subtle shift in someone's energy. A flicker of irritation behind a smile. The way a conversation is about to turn before it does. This isn't mystical intuition. It is a body trained by unpredictability. Hyper-awareness is simply attentiveness shaped by necessity. Your mind learned that missing a signal might cost something important. Over time, this vigilance becomes seamless. You appear calm even when your internal landscape is busy. Thoughts move ahead of moments. Emotions are categorized, softened, managed. Emotional self-management stops being an effort and becomes your default state. You regulate before you relate. You observe before you participate. There's pride in this, and there's grief. The pride comes from competence. You can hold yourself together. You can be relied upon. You rarely unravel publicly. The grief is quieter. It surfaces late at night when the day's composure dissolves into fatigue. You feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Not physically exhausted, but internally aged, as if you have been carrying invisible years that never registered on your face. This is the paradox. The strength that allowed you to survive emotionally demanding spaces now distances you from spontaneity. The depth that makes you perceptive also makes you cautious. You want closeness, but receiving comfort feels unfamiliar, almost destabilizing. Lowering the armor feels less like freedom and more like risk, and so you remain the old soul, composed, reflective, slightly apart. You watch others move lightly through experiences that feel heavy to you. You wonder how they laugh so freely, how they ask for reassurance without calculating its cost. You tell yourself you prefer depth to distraction, and you do. But sometimes you also sense the absence of something simpler, something softer that never quite had room to grow. What if the seriousness you carry was never proof of being different, but evidence of early adaptation? What if the calm that defines you is not a fixed identity, but a pattern carved by environments that required you to grow inward before you could grow wide? When you look back, you see a child who learned quickly, a child who understood that emotional safety depended on awareness, a child who stepped quietly into responsibility without announcing it. That child did not choose to be an old soul. That child chose to feel safe. And now, as an adult, you live inside the architecture built back then, solid, thoughtful, protective. But beneath the steadiness, beneath the insight and restraint, there is a softer question forming, one that doesn't accuse or demand, only wonders. If this depth was shaped by what you had to become, then who might you have been if you hadn't needed to become it so soon? Have you noticed how time doesn't rush you forward, but seems to press gently downward, as if each year adds density rather than distance? You move through life carrying an invisible gravity, holding grief, insight, and unspoken understanding that were never meant to be managed alone. When loss entered too early, something in you tightened. Joy began to feel temporary. Laughter carried an aftertaste. You joined in, but a part of you remained just outside the moment, observing instead of dissolving. Seriousness became your resting posture, not because you lack humor, but because play requires safety, and safety became intertwined with control. You told yourself you didn't need much. Over time, that story hardened into identity. In relationships, you offered steadiness, understanding, reliability. From the outside, it looked admirable. Inside, it felt like standing in a room with the door open, waiting for someone to step far enough in to see you. When self-reliance is praised and vulnerability goes unnoticed, adaptation crystallizes. The nervous system repeats what earns approval. Suppressed emotion doesn't vanish, it settles. A quiet fatigue gathers in the body. A low hum of emptiness replaces warmth. You are admired without being known, valued without being held. The world reinforces this. Classrooms reward composure. Workplaces reward endurance. Culture favors those who carry weight without slowing the system down. Your seriousness reassures others. Your calm becomes useful, and usefulness can quietly erase need. Loneliness then shifts shape, not abandonment, but invisibility. You sit in crowded rooms, feeling slightly offshore, like a shoreline no one swims toward. When you consider asking for support, something hesitates. Years of self-containment echo softly. Handle it yourself. And so you do. Yet beneath the restraint, a quieter truth waits. Depth was never meant to replace lightness. Wisdom was never meant to feel like gravity. The child who learned to be composed did so for safety, not identity. That protection was real, but so was the cost. Perhaps the weight you carry is not proof of insight, but evidence of how early you learned to hold everything together. And if that is true, then who might you be if you no longer had to?